AT&T, Verizon, and Comcast are poised to benefit after U.S. regulators upheld the right of internet service providers to set network asset prices. But consumers may also be facing a higher bill. We're joined now this morning by InterMedia Partners, founder and managing director Leo Hindery. Hindery is the former president and CEO of AT&T Broadband. Leo, great to see you again.
No, happy holidays, Betty.
Same to you. You disagree slightly, though, right? You think it's actually not that great for the telecom and cable operators.
Well, I think all of this is sort of evolutionary, and this was an important step. It wasn't a perfect step. Those of us who believe strongly, and I'm one of them, in the issue of net neutrality, there were certainly aspects of the recommendations made yesterday that I would have changed. But
like what, for instance?
Well, there's two pieces of the proposal that I'm still troubled by. One is that the operators can set what's called reasonable sort of technology standards, but the opportunity is in their hands. So it's not the pure internet neutrality that a number of us were hoping for.
You mean that they can direct?
Yeah, they can use the technology guys still to take some behavioral actions that aren't probably going to help everybody as much as I would have liked. There's also something called paid prioritization, which is a strange phrase, which simply says that if you want to pay more for privilege on the internet distribution, you can. And it penalizes the small, the sort of the up-and-coming content provider. The big guys will pay for this priority, and it shouldn't have been part of the legislation proposal.
I mean, but Leo, you've been, had a long history in cable. You know what it costs, right, to lay down the lines. For something like this, though, I mean, if they didn't have these caveats in there, wouldn't it be a lot harder for AT&T, for any of these operators to then lay down more lines and make more investment? No,
I've always argued that the operator should be entitled to a very fair return for both the risk they take and the capital they expend. The premise for me is always to do it in a non-discriminatory fashion. So I'm pleased with what happened. Again, I would have tweaked it because I think there is some potential for further discrimination. But the larger issue here is that it's a further affirmation that content is moving higher up the value chain, that distribution is becoming almost agnostic. You have young children who will receive their content over time in a much freer sort of fashion.
Right, they're not bolted to their laptop or their computer,
that's
right?
Correct. Yeah. So content is if not the king today, they're sort of the prince in waiting.
Right. And of course, we've got to get that hurdle, though, from free content to paid content. But Leo, because we've been talking about Netflix over the last 24 hours or so. Yesterday, we had Porter Bibb on, who said that Netflix is going to be a game changer for the Hollywood studios. That it is all about the distribution that Netflix owns. And why do you disagree with that?
Well, I think Netflix is a wonderful company, but I think it's an interim step company, and it will provide great value and be very profitable for a while. But it's inconceivable to me, Betty, that the content providers themselves are going to let another intermediary get established between them and the consumer that takes off so much of the profit. They're not going to let Netflix be the old cable industry sort of redux.
Right.
And so you hear the more able CEOs, Rupert Murdoch, Jeff Bewkes at Time Warner, talk about something called sort of over the top, where they see their future as bringing the content more directly to me, the consumer, than through this intermediary Netflix. They're not going to let Netflix.
So in a way, was Netflix kind of a test for them?
Oh, sure. No, it was a canary in the coal mine, and the canary lived. And so you see in the future for your children and for my daughter, you see this more direct flow of content to the consumer. What I don't see into the long term or even into the medium term is Netflix having some sort of dominant, almost monopoly, monopoly-like role.
Well, we are joined again by InterMedia Partners founder and managing director Leo Hindery. Hindery is the former president and CEO of AT&T Broadband, and I know a long-time partner with John Malone. Leo, so just before the break, we were talking about Netflix, and you think it's going to go by the way, essentially.
Well, I think the valuation that's being ascribed to it is going to be diminished over time. The company will be around a long time. But it's again, as I said before the break, it's inconceivable to me that the major content providers are going to let an intermediary get created between them and the consumer that takes so much of the profit.
But they've allowed that so far.
In a nascent sort of trial form, and it works. And you also had to see the technologies continue to evolve. But we've watched Netflix go from stuffing DVDs into envelopes to being an internet-only provider. And the internet is neutral, so to speak. Any of us that have content can concoct a scheme to move it into the consumer's hands.
Okay, so then what is that going to look like in the future?
Well, there'll be more, the big guys, the Time Warners, the News Corps, NBC certainly, you will be able to access their content directly as a consumer for a fee.
Right, through your television set.
Through your television, through your PDA, through any of these devices that sort of define you. It's just that, I lived in the world when cable was a monopoly. I mean, that was sort of my industry for such a long time. It's not conceivable to me, as I've said, that the content people are going to let another monopoly-like intermediary develop between them and the consumer.
Right, to form that. There's two questions out of that. I mean, number one, I must imagine, though, it must make them nervous, even though eventually that will be the trend, to deliver that content directly over the wires, to the customer. That changes your business model, does it not? Completely changes your business model.
Well, the bigger issue for me, and I think the one perhaps a greater moment to your listeners today, is what happens to that sort of wholesale retail model,
right,
where content is sold wholesale to the cable operator and then retail to the consumer. As families take their content directly from the content provider, the cable model is put at risk in some respects. Certainly the at-home portion less so, but the transient sort of portable side very much so. And as you diminish the subscription stream at home, sort of what makes up for it.
Right.
And that's my point, is there's no room in that transition for a company like Netflix into the long term.
But then what do the Time Warner cables and the Comcast and the Cablevisions, what do they have to do to make sure they don't get caught out?
Well, Comcast has said it buys NBC. It buys a major content provider. And cable multiples, these are brilliantly run companies. They're much better run than in my heyday even. I mean, people like Glenn Britt and others do an amazing job. But they trade as a security for a fraction of what we traded for when we had the monopoly characteristic.
Right. Well, actually, we talked with Glenn Britt about a month ago, and what he was saying was that, look, the internet is coming. We know that, internet television, but there's no business model yet, and so therefore the cable companies will continue to survive because there is no business model yet for the advertisers to be able to make this a viable, I guess, option for these content providers. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, anything that Glenn Britt says, I tend to agree with. He is really, really good. My point is that the at-home delivery systems will stay intact. The satellite and the cable operator, their margins will be impinged as these transitions occur. The point that is a moment to me right now is this sort of out-of-home encounters. The one that your children who are young will
the mobile phone and the tablets.
Arguably, they don't even sit on a couch into the long term like
you don't know my kids. No, that's what they do. Leo, thank you so much. But yes, one day it'll all be on our phones and our tablets. Being that way in Europe right now, in fact.
It is, very much so.
Leo, thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate it.
Happy holiday, Betty.
Same to you. Leo Hindery of InterMedia Partners.